So, it seems like somebody wants to learn some Duel, huh? Well, let me tell you right now, it's not as dumb and as easy as you might think. Now, if you're only a Conquest player and you're new to the kind of, the Duel scene, you might think this is a 5v5 MOBA and it's not meant to be played one-on-one. Now, this is obvious. This game was meant for Conquest and that's what it's balanced around, but I hear a lot of high-end pro players, for example, claiming that Duel doesn't require any skill and it isn't really a real game mode. And their justification for this is simply because there are some gods that are much stronger than others in one-on-one, which is bound to happen and is obvious because it's designed for 5v5, but have you ever thought about this crucial one major plot point that what if not only you, but also your opponent could also pick a top tier god that also does well in a one-on-one scenario?
What a twist!
The first and most important aspect of 1v1 is the meta. The meta changes everything. Every time there's a new map or a new god or item or even patch, the meta shifts, which can greatly affect the game mode and Duel more than anything. Like I said, this game mode isn't designed around one-on-one, so there's only a number of gods you can play that will really do well in this meta. In the current meta, hunters and most auto attack based characters do really well. So let's take a look at this tier list. Now, as we can see, S tier and above are usually the gods you will want to be playing to grind out the ranks. I know I play some lower tier gods every now and then, but understand I just do that for fun. I mean, hey, I'm already in Grandmasters. Why does it really matter, right? It's nice to have fun with the game every once in a while. Now, my best suggestion for grinding out and understanding the current state of this meta is to choose a few gods, around 2 or 3, and play them over and over. Basically, only 3 gods can be banned per side, so what your goal should be is to counterban so that you can only play one of your mains and not be too worried about their pick. We'll be going over counterbanning in a minute, but for now let's take a look at some of the gods. Personally, I have a few mains in this current meta, or more or less gods I just play more often than others as I'm looking to learn and really master them for myself, right? These aren't all of them, but my current god pool consists of Ullr, Freya, Anhur, Erlang, Shen, Kali, and Hebo. Now I usually pick these like if I want to grind out some TP and I'm looking to win. So for the most part, you want to have a set god pool, usually around 3 gods that you feel safe playing. And once you pick these gods, most likely gods that you're kind of comfortable with, you're going to figure out what counters those gods. Let's talk about banning and counterbanning. Counterbanning can be difficult at times because there's quite a few gods and quite a few counters to all those gods. So a big issue which can screw you over is, like say you're playing Kali or something and you ban Apollo. Last ban, the bitch bans Kali. So now you just kind of wasted a ban because Apollo doesn't really counter most of the gods in your god pool, for example. And there's other potential counters that you could have banned that are open right now. And I understand that can be rough, but there's ways you could potentially avoid that sort of thing if you ban correctly. First off, let's go over some gods and their counter picks. I understand my word is not gold. The gods I show you that counter them are based off of my personal experience and no one else's. This is based off my opinion and what I've decided over the course of my one-on-one career, and there are plenty of other opinions in the Duel community. So if you're curious about a certain matchup, feel free to ask me or any other higher tier player their opinion. It's always nice to see things in the eyes of another person. If all else fails, do what everyone else does and learn from experience. Play some matchups with your friends or test out things with people, or just play the gods yourselves and figure out who you think are the biggest counters to the gods you're playing. You get a pretty good feel for it after a while and create your own opinions depending on your playstyle, which is just as important. With all that out of the way, here are my counters I found throughout this season of Smite to most of the gods that I play. Obviously, some gods do better against others. Higher tier gods can do well versus other higher tier gods, which is something to always keep in mind, but they're not always a counter. Like in a 100 matchup between Hui versus Apollo, one god might be particularly stronger in some scenarios, but it wouldn't really be considered a counter matchup just because of that. Counter matchups are matchups which heavily favor one god. Examples would be my ability-based Ullr. As most of you know, Skadi destroys ability-based Ullr because of the way I build and the way I play. Simply because there is just no security on landing the axe and, just being boxed out, as well as matchups, let's say by random, Ravana versus Anhur, for example. Ravana has almost no way of getting close to Anhur. The second Anhur gets a Frostbound, with the slow of his 1, there's little to nothing Ravana can do without heavily counterplaying him, which is what we call a counter matchup. Also, keep in mind, the way you build and play can heavily influence whether or not it's a counter matchup. Like I said earlier, building an ability-based, high-power build can change how the matchup is played. Like, for example, like I said earlier with Ullr versus Skadi. Most of these are my own personal opinion, but I also have the opinions of some other high-level Duel players, so this is generally what I was able to come up with. We'll go over some generally played gods. So on the left we have our god, and on the right we have counters. So I'll go over them individually. Kronos loses to AMC, Skadi, and Freya. Freya has a hard time versus Skadi, Hebo, Loki, and Serket. Erlang loses to Bakasura, Hebo, Freya, Apollo, and Kali. Uller's counters are Skadi, Kronos, AMC, and Freya. Kali is countered by Apollo, Freya, Hebo, and Arachne. Hebo is countered by AMC, Skadi, and Kronos. On her is countered by AMC, Skadi, Freya, and Hebo. Skadi is countered by Izanami, Bakasura, Erlang Shen, and Bellona. AMC is countered by Kali, Freya, Skadi, Bakasura, and Osiris. Nemesis is countered by Hebo, and other lower tier gods like, Susan was kind of countered by fucking everybody. Anyways, with all that said, keep in mind the meta shifts and counters change with it, so don't rely on this list forever, things will obviously change. So now that we know the different counters, let's quickly go over the banning phase. This also has quite a bit to do with the meta, so we'll go over each 3 bans. We're going to classify both our very first bans as A. In the banning A phase, this is a ban you generally don't like playing against, and counters most of the gods in your god pool. Me, for example, I usually ban Bakasura. It's not because Bakasura is the strongest god in my opinion, but he's one of the gods I generally never play. I don't have a complete feel and natural understanding of how much his damage scales and stuff, so since I'm not used to playing him whatsoever, because of that, added on with the fact that he counters quite a few gods in my pool, make him my first safe ban in the A class. So in the A class, you should always be banning your safe ban. The B class, this is the second ban for each side. Here is where I usually ban the strongest gods, in my opinion, that I don't usually want to play against and counter most of mine, right? So usually in here I tend to ban either Kronos, Kali, or Freya. I tend to ban Freya a lot more often simply because I feel as if she's very hard to counter, especially if she gets anywhere near ahead with any of the gods I usually play, and it can be really annoying and frustrating. So in the B class, it's nice to ban a god you consider over the top, strong, and you're usually not playing. So do with that as you will. The C class. Now, the last ban really depends on which side you're on. If you have the last ban, it's always great because you can counterban depending on exactly who you want to play, and they can't really counterban your counterban, right? So try to keep in mind they might actually know what you want to play based on your bans and can ban based on what they think you're going to go. So in the C class, it's usually best to ban what you think they could potentially be going for, and always keep in mind that who is open in your scenario, and think about in C class who you could play and who they could play. So flush out the risk and reward, kind of like I did in my Kali game. I banned respectively. The only considered counterban left open in this instance would be Apollo, which I wasn't worried too much about as there were lots of other top tier gods open. It's really hard to go over every type of ban and counterban in the game, as I'm probably not going to be playing all the gods that you're playing in particular, so you're going to have to learn off some experience and see things based on your opinions and your own playstyle. The last thing I want to cover before I finish the meta episode of Duel for Dummies is the starting meta. This is pretty simple. Last season you would either invade or be invaded, but this season, unless you have Hog, it's illogical to just start at the buffs. Going for blue is really dumb, as they could just kind of invade you and most likely kill you, or simply they could just pressure out red and then take out their own blue, putting them in the lead. Now you should almost always be starting out in mid, pushing waves. The only time you ever do red is when you have Wrath and can just take it for free, but on the off chance you're an ADC, you can usually just pressure out the small creeps for very little risk, for like a small bonus lead. Okay, so I know there's a ton to cover in this series, so if there's anything you want me to specifically focus on in an episode, just leave it in the comments, okay? I have a lot to go over. There's kill potential, understanding of the different characters in the game, counter building in specifics, the TP system itself, improving off of others, etc. Just tons of different things that I have to go over in this series, so I've got a lot of episodes to cover. So your support is always appreciated. Thank you a ton for watching, and I hope this helped you in some way. Anyways, I will see you next time, guys. Have a good one.